What's good, y'all? And welcome to another preseason preview video. In today's video, we're going over the Toronto Raptors. In case this is your first preseason preview video of mine that you're seeing, basically what I'm going to do is go over all the offseason moves that this team made and then look into the future and try to see what we can expect in this next coming season. Before we get into it, I want to remind you guys to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you already haven't so you don't miss out on the future videos. After you're done watching this, make sure you click the link in the description. It'll bring you to a playlist of all the other preseason preview videos that I've done. And without further ado, let's take a look at the additions the Toronto Raptors made this offseason. The Raptors had a relatively quiet offseason, but they did still bring in some guys, including trading for Davion Mitchell from the Sacramento Kings and drafting Jakob Poeltl out of Baylor. Most of the roster changes that the Raptors made happened during last regular season. That was when they traded OG and Pascal Siakam, brought in guys like Emmanuel Quickley, Barrett, Kelly Olynyk. Those type of moves were done already. So this offseason, there weren't too many more moves to be made. I still think both of these guys can contribute here in Toronto, though. Starting off with Davion Mitchell, he kind of fell out of the rotation there in Sacramento. Of course, they have De'Aaron Fox as their main point guard. Then they also had Keon Ellis that kind of emerged as that defensive first guard. And Davion Mitchell is just that. He's a defensive first guard. His offense is a little shaky, but he gets on the court and he competes defensively. That's where he really made his name in the league. And like I said, with Keon Ellis coming in there in Sacramento, it kind of left him as the odd man out. So it makes sense that Toronto kind of buys low here and brings in this defensive guy. I like what he could bring as their backup point guard. Offensively too, he's coming off a career year shooting the ball, shooting a career high 36% from three. If he's able to keep that up or maybe even keep climbing those ranks and adding to his three-point percentage, then he would really be a big help to the Raptors. And then their draft pick, Jakob Poeltl, their main draft pick, their own first-round pick this season, the Raptors did not own. They had to give that over to San Antonio in the Jakob Poeltl trade, but they still were able to go into the draft and leave with some talent. And I think Jakob Poeltl is a pretty talented player. He's very raw as a prospect right now, but he does show signs to be a solid NBA player. His shooting form looks great. He's really good at shooting these contested shots. That makes me believe that he will be able to translate that to the next level and become a relatively good shooter. And defensively, he's pretty solid too. He's 6'5", so he's got pretty solid size on him. Overall, like I said, very raw. And at the point that Toronto's at right now, being a rebuilding team, they have more of a chance to, I don't want to say like shoot in the dark or anything like that, but take these bigger chances on these raw prospects and kind of help them develop into the players that they think they could be. Like I said before, with most of the Raptors moves already being done last regular season, they didn't really lose too many players, but they did lose Gary Trent in free agency, who signed a new deal with the Milwaukee Bucks. This loss kind of sucks in my eyes if I'm the Raptors, but at the same time, I don't really think it's their fault that they lost him. Gary Trent was a free agent this season, or this offseason, and he went into the offseason seeking, I think, around $18 to $20 million a year. He had really high value on himself, and he ended up signing a new contract with the Bucks at the league minimum. He's only making about $2 million this offseason. So I feel like if you're really pointing fingers, I would say the people at fault are Gary Trent Jr. and maybe his agent for overvaluing him, because I'm sure the Raptors would want to bring him back if they could, if they had him at a fair price range. I don't think they would want to spend that $18 to $20 million. As we can see, no other team really wanted to spend that $18 to $20 million on him. But he was still young at 25, so he kind of still fits that timetable that the Raptors have right now in their rebuild. And also, his three-point shooting is very much needed on this roster. He was one of the biggest three-point threats on the Raptors last season, and he would have been able to continue being that high-level threat this season if he stayed. But again, he had himself valued super high, and it makes sense if he's not making the money that he wants, that he goes and plays for a contender to try to build his value back up. So again, I'm not really blaming the Raptors too much, but I do think this loss could sting a little bit. And now that we went over all the moves that the Raptors made, let's take a look at a potential rotation. The starting lineup is mostly the same as it was last season after all the trades were done, except we do include Grady Dick at the starting shooting guard. Starting alongside him, we have Emmanuel Quickley, Barrett, Scotty Barnes, and Jakob Poeltl. And then off the bench, we have Davion Mitchell, Jakob Poeltl, Bruce Brown, Chris Boucher, and Kelly Olynyk. Looking at the Raptors roster right now, they are in a fantastic position for just year one of their rebuild. They have a great foundation laid out. The hardest part of a rebuild in my eyes is bringing in the main talent guys that you're going to be building around, and they kind of already have that sorted out. Scotty Barnes was a first-time All-Star last year. I don't think anyone disagrees that he is the guy for the Raptors, being that 6'9" point forward, kind of do-it-all type of guy, do it all offensively and do it all defensively, respectfully. He does so much for this Raptors team. I believe he was one of the only players last season to lead his team in all 5 major stat categories. That's points, rebounds, assists, steals, and blocks. He led the Raptors in all of that last season. And Scotty's only 23 years old, but even beyond that, they got guys like RJ Barrett, who's only 24 years old. He had a mini career resurgence last season after being traded to his hometown Toronto Raptors. His 3-point shooting was immaculate, the best it has ever really been in his career. He was still consistent at getting to the basket and even increased his finishing rate and was finishing better. The playmaking was kind of increased all around. His play was much better since coming to Toronto, so hopefully he can continue that into this next season. But then even on top of that, they have another guy, Immanuel Quickley, that I think is going to be super important to their rebuild and to their eventual contention. He still is only 25 years old. Like RJ Barrett, he had a little resurgence when he came to Toronto too. He was coming off the bench for pretty much his whole career in New York, now starting, being the main point guard, the main ball handler here in Toronto. He's really shown a lot. He's shown his playmaking skills and abilities, averaging just under 7 assists per game. His 3-point shooting has been incredible. And most teams, when they first start rebuilding, they'd be lucky to have one of these guys that are young and at this level of play. But the Raptors have 3 of them, which I think is immaculate. And then to a lesser degree, they have Grady Dick, who was their first-round draft pick last year. To start off the year, he wasn't really getting consistent minutes, but as the year went on, he got better and better, got more consistent minutes. And this season, like you guys just saw, I have him penciled in as the starting shooting guard on this team, so he should have even more opportunity to grow his game and show what he could be in the NBA. I really like the potential that he brings at that 2 guard. He's only 21 years old. But even beyond just the young players and talent that they have on their roster going into the rebuild, they have guys that should have some decent trade value to even bring in maybe more young talent or more draft assets or whatever it is. They have value on this roster. A guy like Bruce Brown, who's on the last year of his deal, I'm pretty confident that they would be looking to trade him somewhere during this season. But even guys like Kelly Olynyk maybe, or Chris Boucher, Jakob Poeltl, I'm not saying they're going to trade all of these guys. Maybe they'll trade none of these guys. But I do think that they would be able to get value back at the trade deadline from other contending teams, whether that's more young pieces or just draft capital. Whatever it is, either way, you can never have enough value, and the Raptors have a lot of value on this roster. And now that we have an idea of what this Raptors team could look like, let's take a look at one of their biggest strengths. Here you can see the assist per game leaders from last season on the Toronto Raptors. They have a lot of above average playmakers on their roster. They have 2 guys averaging over 6 assists, 4 guys averaging over 4, and 6 guys averaging over 2.5. I think the Raptors should have some very high-level ball movement throughout this whole season, even though they are a very young and rebuilding team. Part of that, like I just showed, was the personnel that they have, but a big other part of that is the system that Darko Rajakovic has kind of implemented on offense for the Raptors. His offensive scheme is all about making that extra pass, looking for the next guy, collapsing the defense, and then kicking out to get the advantage. A lot of that is kind of very empowering to these players, as we can see. I mentioned before Immanuel Quickley averaging about 7 assists per game since coming to the Raptors. Before he was on the Raptors, the same season we're talking about, when he was on the Knicks, he averaged 2.5 assists per game. I know his role is completely different. He was coming off the bench as a 6-man with the Knicks. Now with the Raptors, he's their starting point guard. But still, going from 2.5 assists per game to almost 7, that's insane. I know Immanuel Quickley, he, in my eyes, was very underrated as a playmaker, and now he's able to kind of show it a little bit more. But I do think that part of that is Rajakovic's system. Scotty Barnes is also a very high-level playmaker. He averaged over 6 assists per game last year. He's kind of made the point forward type of role his own. There'll be times where he brings up the ball as that point guard. Sometimes it's Immanuel Quickley. Either way, he's shown that he is a very willing and above average passer. I like what he can bring, being 6'9", giving that size advantage, and then also the fact that he's able to make these plays for his teammates. And talking about size and playmaking, Kelly Olynyk and Jakob Poeltl, I think both are super underrated as playmakers. I didn't realize that Kelly Olynyk was averaging over 4.5 assists per game. I didn't know he was at that level, but for years now we've seen Kelly Olynyk be able to play make out the post and make those reads. Jakob Poeltl, I feel like, is super underrated, even more than Kelly Olynyk in that playmaking aspect, because he makes some really nice passes at times. I guess that comes from his time with the Spurs, maybe. And the fact that they'll have at least one of those guys running center majority of the time really, I think, could benefit the offense. Having a great playmaker at your center, I think, is a super underrated part of offenses as a whole, because a lot of teams on defense, they kind of allow the center to be the guy that they help off of, or the guy that they let kind of operate out there on the perimeter. But if you have a good playmaker out there, it opens up a whole nother level to your offense. And then to a lesser degree, they got guys like Bruce Brown, who I think is a pretty positive playmaker. Throughout his stops in his NBA career, whether it's the Nets or the Nuggets, he's shown that he's able to make those connected passes, sometimes even play a little bit of point guard or point forward, whatever you want to call it. Also, RJ Barrett, I would say he's probably like a neutral playmaker. He's not anything crazy. He's not a negative guy. But in this system of Darko Rajakovic's, he's kind of, again, empowering him a little bit more. He was able to bump up his assists to over 4 per game since coming over to the Raptors, while keeping his turnovers around his career average of 2 to 2.5. Overall, I think the playmaking on this team should be very good. Now that we've highlighted the strength, though, we got to go to the opposite end of the spectrum and look at the weakness that I see for this Raptors team. Here you have Raptors players sorted by 3-point attempts per game from last season, along with their 3-point percentage. The average 3-point percentage from last season was 36.6. So as you can see, they only have 2 players that are technically above average 3-point shooters and 2 players that are around average. Everyone else is below average. This is why I said that the Raptors should miss Gary Trent this season, because he had that near 40% 3-point shooting and also had the volume to attest to it as well. He would have been one of the top players on that list right there when it came to attempts and also from percentages, and they lost out on him. There's nothing they can really do about that now, though. When I look at this roster, I do think that they should struggle a lot shooting the ball. The one guy that I think I'm super confident in as being that main 3-point threat is Immanuel Quickley. Throughout his whole career, he's been a good 3-point shooter, and he's done it in a bunch of different ways, whether it's off the pull-up, from deep, or off the dribble, or off catch and shoot. He's very solid at that as well. And as you saw, he was leading them in attempts, so he has the volume to attest to it. He's got the percentage. I think a lot of their 3-point attempts and makes are going to be coming from Immanuel Quickley. The other guy that was above average was his former Knicks teammate, RJ Barrett. I'm a little bit more worried about RJ and him being able to keep up this shooting percentage, even though since coming to Toronto, he shot the ball great. In Canada, for Team Canada in the Olympics, he shot the ball great. But he still is a career 34% 3-point shooter. And we saw something similar like this happen before in RJ's career. In year 2, he shot over 40% from 3. And then when it came to the playoffs, when the Knicks were versing the Atlanta Hawks, the Hawks fully gapped him. They said, RJ Barrett, if you're going to beat us by shooting threes, you will beat us. You got it. That's fine. They let him shoot all the threes he wanted, and not a lot of them went in. And then we saw in the years to come later with the Knicks, he was never able to reach that 40% 3-point shooting again. Now with the Raptors, it's a new scheme, new system, new team, all of that, new environment. Maybe he's able to keep that up. But like I said, I'm a little bit more worried about him being able to do that, considering throughout his whole career, he really hasn't been able to. Also last season, Scottie Barnes took a shooting jump. He was around 30% or maybe even below 30% his first 2 seasons in the NBA. This year jumped up to around 34-35% and increased the volume on top of that. So, you're taking steps, Scottie. I like where you're going. Maybe we can get that to keep climbing up a little bit more. If he becomes around 36 or 37% 3-point shooter, I don't really know how teams are going to be able to guard him, but that would be a huge help to the Raptors team as a whole. And then also Grady Dick, I mentioned before that he is now penciled in at that starting shooting guard position after not having too much of a consistent role last year. So I do think his volume is going to go up. I think he is going to be one of the leaders in 3-point attempts for the Raptors this season. It's more about maybe getting that percentage up. He was around average in his rookie season, so if he can get closer to that 40%, that would be a big help as well. But as you see right now, we're confident in IQ, and then there's other guys that maybe could be good three-point shooters, but nothing really concrete. And I feel like that could really muddy up the offense a little bit, especially when you're talking about your main guys being Scotty Barnes and RJ Barrett. Those two are mainly slashers and finishers. Their bread and butter is getting to the basket, finishing, or getting to the free throw line. It makes it a lot harder to do that when teams can just collapse and leave all your shooters on the perimeter because they can't knock down a shot. I feel like that could really give them some struggles offensively. But, you hope that RJ can keep up his three-point shooting. You hope that Grady Dick and Scotty Barnes can continue growing as three-point shooters. Those are things that you would hope for. But if that doesn't happen, man, the offense could get pretty shaky. And now it is time for the fan segment. And here representing the Toronto Raptors, I got my boy Cash here with me. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me very much.
For sure. For those of you guys who don't follow him already, make sure you check out the link in the descriptions. Go into his Twitter. It's just all around great stuff he puts out. Let's hop right into it, though. The Toronto Raptors, I know they made a lot of their moves mid-season last year, but I'm interested to see, what is your favorite move that they made this offseason?
Well, I think this offseason was an important one for them. Like you said, they did make their biggest moves in the middle of the season last year, and those really set the standard for where this team is going. We're fully into rebuild mode now, and Masai is really embracing that, which I think is important. My first answer to this question and my favorite move is re-signing Scotty and re-signing IQ, because those are our biggest players and our biggest pieces right now, and we do not want them even really thinking of leaving, because Toronto isn't a super hot destination for free agents. So when you get someone like that, you want to make sure that they're locked down. And on that note of making sure that they're locked down, another one of my favorite moves is the draft that we had. We drafted Jonathan Mogbo, and I know that made Scotty very happy because that's one of his childhood best friends. And we also drafted Jakob Poeltl, who's a great shooter. I'm excited to see what he can provide to the team, and Jamal Sheed. The team has been lacking on defense a lot, and though I haven't watched much tape on Sheed, his summer league tape, he was really providing a lot of defensive identity for the Raptors, and I think that's something that we need again with OG and a lot of those other guys gone. Masai has really been putting on a classic Masai performance this offseason. He also traded Jalen McDaniels for Davion Mitchell, and I think maybe a second-round pick it was, which isn't groundbreaking, but Jalen McDaniels was really hard to watch last season. And I'm excited to see what Davion Mitchell can do for the team. Whether it be nothing at all, that would be fine, because Jalen McDaniels wasn't doing much more. But I think Davion can potentially provide some really important defense to the team that we've been lacking recently.
Yeah, I'm a pretty big fan of Davion Mitchell. I like what he can bring to the squad. You mentioned the lack of defense after you made a bunch of these moves. He's one of those guys that can bring you some of that defense. My personal favorite, though, I'm going to show a little bit of my Knicks bias here. It is Emmanuel Quickly getting his big old bag. I'm just happy that he's able to go somewhere and earn that amount of money, because obviously with the emergence of Jalen Brunson, the Knicks weren't going to give him that much money to just be a backup. And now he gets to go to Toronto and kind of spread his wings and hopefully flourish into that player that we saw so many flashes of in New York. And like I said, I'm very happy that he's able to get that life-changing money there. 5 years, $175 million. That's a lot of money.
It's deserved too. He really put on like a crazy stretch after Scotty went down. I wish I could have seen them play more together, but it's kind of inevitable. But it was really nice to see him kind of put the team on his back along RJ without Scotty being on the field. And some of those numbers he was putting up were really crazy. And I think he definitely convinced Raptors fans during that stretch that he could be the point guard of the future. So whether or not that pans out, I'm excited to see where it goes.
For sure. Yeah, I like that he's able to be a little bit more on the ball here in Toronto, show a little bit more of his skill sets.
Me too.
Kind of on this same note that we're on right here, moving on to our next question. Who do you think's the most underrated player on the Raptors right now?
Funny enough, you said on that topic, my answer for this question is RJ Barrett. I think that he has made a lot of strides, especially since that trade mid-season last year. He had an unbelievable post-trade year for the Raptors. His efficiency was out of this world. He was finishing at the rim at a high rate, shot over 40% from three. He was just doing a lot for the team without Scotty, putting the team on his back like IQ was. And then in the Olympics, we also saw that he was continuing to stay at that level. And honestly, he was doing more for the team than Jamal Murray was. And that's maybe not the hot take because Jamal was really bad during that run, but we were really relying on him. And I think a lot of Canadian fans or the Canadian people that were watching the Olympics were probably surprised by how good RJ was during that run. And as well, I think that he really appreciates being in Canada. I know that he loves New York. I've obviously kept up with him since the trade, and he often posts about New York and how much he loved being there. But I think there is something to being able to play for your hometown, and it seems like he loves representing us, and he's really been playing like it. I mean, some of the stuff that he's been doing for this team has been unprecedented, and I'm curious to see how he'll look alongside Scotty next year because I don't know if RJ is the best off-ball player, but it's an improvement of his game that I think would be really important. And his improvement in his shot that we've seen recently, shooting up to 40% from three, would be a really big help for the team alongside Scotty. So I'm hoping that can stay up to how it's been.
I thought about RJ when thinking about my answer for this question. I don't know if it's just because I've watched him in New York for the last few seasons that makes it think like he's not underrated. I do think he's a much better fit here in Toronto, which could maybe make him lean a little bit underrated. You said his jump shot has vastly improved since going over there, and you mentioned it yourself too. He's not the best off-ball player, and I think that was a big issue here in New York. It was a lot of Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle with the ball that led him to just kind of be off the ball, just kind of spotting up more. But here in Toronto, he gets a little bit more opportunity. But ultimately, when I was thinking of an underrated player, I was kind of going back and forth between your two centers of Jakob Poeltl and Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah, Poeltl was definitely an answer that I was thinking as well. But I'll let you continue before I branch off of that.
Yeah, I feel like people don't really I don't know if understand or value the amount of rim protection he brings. His size is incredible. Rebounding is there. I feel like he's a little underrated as a playmaker too. He's not Jokic or anything, but he makes some pretty nice passes when I'm watching. And I feel like people don't talk about him too much as like a high level starting center.
I definitely agree. I think it might be a product of the team being so bad recently. Even when we acquired him, we were never great. A lot of the fans were even mad about that trade, even though maybe value-wise it wasn't necessarily super horrible on paper. I don't think a first for Poeltl, on paper is the worst thing ever, but when you're a rebuilding team with Scotty Barnes trying to do a fire sale, it might not be the best move. But he's actually provided a lot of interesting things next to Scotty. I thought that I would want Scotty next to maybe like a spacing big or something along those lines, but they've been able to develop a really interesting pick and roll chemistry with both of them having high level playmaking and dumping it off to each other back and forth. It's really interesting to watch. And I think his defense is definitely underrated, whether it be rim protection or even on the perimeter. I think he's actually better than most people realize. And short rolling especially, I think that he's a great short roll passer. And I would like to see him stay on the team, but honestly, I'm not sure if he will. He doesn't really match the timeline, but if I was a contending team, I would love to have him.
For sure. I mean, you guys have a few of those pieces. Kind of Kelly Olynyk could fall into that same mold, even though you just acquired him, or a guy like Bruce Brown. I'm sure there could be a lot of moves that could be made during the season, or beyond for the future for you guys. Yeah, but overall, I really do like what he brings to the team, and I think he can add a lot of value. And real quick, before we finish this up, I'm very interested to see what your expectations are for the Raptors this season. You said it yourself, they kicked off the rebuild midway through last year. So I'm trying to see where your head's at right now.
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting answer because I feel like I'm very open-minded to what this season can bring. It's interesting also because I felt like last year was certainly a rebuild, but I guess it was probably happening after the trade deadline. But Masai Ujiri in his press conference came out and said that this is the first year of our official rebuild, I guess, and I'll take him at his word. So it's hard to think, I've seen a lot of people online, and I don't disagree with this, say that the Raptors could make a play-in push. And I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. The East is pretty weak. There's some teams that, like the Bulls or whatever, who could be falling. And with Scotty, RJ, and IQ, I think that that's a really strong core that if they really mesh together, could put it together at a high level. But at the same time, if we were a lottery team or like even one of the worst teams in the league, I can't say I would be too upset at that. Maybe because there's a really special draft class coming up and, Cooper Flagg wouldn't be too bad next to Scotty Barnes. But as far as my actual expectations, I think I am more so on the up and up side because I think the East is pretty weak and I'm relatively high on the Raptors. I think they could potentially make a play-in push.
Yeah, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Like you said, the East is pretty weak, especially when you look at like the bottom half of it. I
Hmm.
feel like you guys can kind of flirt around in that same range of, like you mentioned, Chicago or Charlotte or
Hmm.
Atlanta. There's a few of those teams that I feel like you guys are pretty solidly on the same tier. So it could definitely happen.
Hmm. Yeah, it's hard because it almost feels like I don't know what I want, that I've heard so much. I'm not a big draft analyst, I don't watch tons of college ball, but I've heard lots and lots of praise about this upcoming draft class. And so I'm intrigued by it. I mean, obviously we all know about Cooper Flag and a lot of the other guys at the top, but I've heard it's deep too. So I am interested in potentially being in the lottery, and it's like I said, it's our first year of our rebuild, so you would hope that, or maybe not hope, but you would maybe expect that you would be in a lottery. But I guess Scotty is a pretty good base right now for a rebuild, and he could push us along pretty quickly.
Yeah, the foundation is for sure there, and I think you guys have a pretty clear direction you're heading into. In case you guys aren't already following, make sure you check out those links below. I appreciate you coming on, man. Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much.
much, Jacob.
Yes, sir. And now it is time for my ceiling, floor, and expectations for the Toronto Raptors. Starting with the ceiling, I could see them being as high as the 9th seed and making the play-in tournament. Now, I don't know if Toronto fans would really be happy about this, like I've been talking about throughout this whole video. They are starting year 1 of their rebuild, and usually in a rebuild you want to lose a lot so you have a high draft choice. In this situation, they would be in the play-in tournament. I don't think that they would be able to win 2 play-in games and make the playoffs. So they would still be in the lottery, which is nice. They would probably have a lower lottery pick, but regardless, it would still be fun. I think they have talent on this roster that are going to be able to win games and be competitive in games, but I don't think they're playoff level. At their floor, I think they could be as low as the 11th seed. Like I said, they have talent on this roster, so I don't think that they're going to be able to bottom out and lose enough to be the 15th seed. I know they are rebuilding and they want to lose. They want that draft pick, but I don't think they'd be able to get that low unless they shut down a bunch of guys throughout the season. With the 11th seed, though, they would miss the play-in tournament, so they would still have pretty high odds in the lottery. Like I said, though, I don't think they would be towards the bottom with teams like the Nets or the Wizards or something like that. My expectations for the Raptors, though, I'm going to slot them in right at that 10th seed, right in between their ceiling and their floor, of course. I like this team. I think that they could be fun, but I do think that they have some pretty glaring holes on their roster, and they are still super, super young. So I don't think that they're going to be contending or competing for playoff spots, and I don't think they should be competing for playoff spots. So I feel like they're in a very solid spot right here for their rebuild. If they finish off with the 10th seed, I'm sure a lot of Toronto Raptors fans would be very happy with how the season went. What do you guys think, though? Let me know down in the comments where you think the Toronto Raptors are going to finalize in this year's standings. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave it a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In the description, there's links to all my social medias, so make sure you follow me on all those to keep up to date with me. Catch y'all